The Bahamas. When you think of the Bahamas, what images come to mind? For us, it's always been giant resorts and even more gigantic cruise ships, shedding thousands of tourists onto a couple of overcrowded vacation islands.
This sort of thing ain't my bag, baby.
So after over 2 years of COVID lockdowns and travel restrictions, when we were looking for a place to finally get away, the Bahamas was definitely not on the top of our list. But when you're a bit hesitant to fly commercial because of the COVID risk and all the craziness with airline travel over the past year, and you're a new low-time pilot living in Toronto, looking to stretch your comfort zone but not go crazy, where can you go? We wanted somewhere we could get to within a couple of days of flying, somewhere warm and tropical, and somewhere not infested with COVID, so unfortunately most of the southern US states were out. That left the Caribbean. Anywhere you go in the Caribbean, you either need to go through Cuba, which is not really an option when flying through the US, or you need to go through the Bahamas. So I started to look into it, and what I found really surprised me. I had no idea that the Bahamas is this huge archipelago with over 700 islands and 2,400 keys that cover almost 500,000 square kilometers. Naturally, there must be a lot more to the Bahamas than just Freeport and Nassau, and I began to research the islands and the process of flying there and back in a small single-engine piston plane. Now, by no means am I the first person to have flown down to the Bahamas, but for anyone who's doing it for the first time, there's actually a lot to know and to plan, and that whole planning process and the research actually turned into pretty much a part-time job for me for the better part of 3 months. And as I was going through that research and planning process, it generally fell into 3 different categories. First is researching the islands and deciding which ones we're going to be visiting. Second is planning the route down from Toronto to Florida and then Florida over to the Bahamas and back again. And then third is deciding what to pack and packing, not just for the trip, but for any emergency situations as well. For those who might be considering doing this for the first time, or are just curious about the process, I'll talk through each of those 3 steps in this video. And I'll also share down in the links below, in the description below, I'll share the links to any websites and documents that I found useful, and also share the links for the things that I bought to make the trip go a little bit better. Now, this video is the first of a series of videos that I'm putting together on this trip. This one is all about the prep process, and I've put chapter links in the video itself, so if you want to jump ahead to a particular part of the video, feel free to do that. The upcoming video will start to get into the actual flight down to Florida, and then from there the videos will continue on flying to the Bahamas, our adventures there, and then flying back home again, and the unexpected and unwelcome adventure we had on the way back. I hope you enjoy the series, and if you do, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It'll help me grow my channel. Enjoy. With dozens of major islands to choose from, trying to find 1 or 2 to spend our time on could have quickly become overwhelming, so we started by laying out our criteria. First, the islands had to be accessible by a small plane, with a publicly available airport with a well-maintained runway. Second, it needed to be quiet and secluded to give us a peaceful, serene vacation, but with amenities like restaurants and grocery stores nearby to help supplement whatever we'd take with us. It had to have good snorkeling and a few interesting sights to see, and it had to be no more than about 90 minutes flying time from Florida. With 61 airports scattered throughout the Bahamas, it seems like there's no shortage of options. But many of these airports are either private or restricted, or they're not well maintained because the traffic is so light and the runways have fallen into disrepair. Of the islands that are left, many are so remote and isolated that they didn't feel quite right for our first trip there. I'd want to be more familiar with island life before committing to a week on such a remote place as Long Island or San Salvador. So we pretty quickly narrowed the search down to a few islands: Abaco, Eleuthera, and Exuma. Abaco is the largest and most popular island outside of Grand Bahama and New Providence, and it also apparently has some terrific snorkeling and diving, but it was devastated by Hurricane Dorian just a few years ago, and the island hasn't really recovered yet, so we ruled that one out. Eleuthera is one of the longest islands, spanning over 100 miles from tip to tip, with 3 airports and a couple of decent towns. It's got gorgeous white and pink sand beaches, some good snorkeling scattered around the island, a playground for the rich and famous in Harbour Town, and some interesting historical and ecological sites to check out. Exuma is actually a series of islands, with Great Exuma as its anchor and a train of small keys running northwest from there. Many of the keys are privately owned by the rich and famous, including an island that David Copperfield turned into this crazy exclusive resort that starts at $40,000 a night. Definitely not our scene. The keys also include some unique sites like the Isle of Pigs, Iguana Key that's home to hundreds of rock iguanas, and the Thunderball Grotto where scenes from the James Bond film Thunderball were filmed. More recently, Great Exuma has gotten some attention as the home of the infamous Fire Festival fiasco. In the end, we decided we'd spend a week on Eleuthera, followed by a week on Exuma, and we went ahead and booked an Airbnb on each. Most people who fly to the Bahamas think about the beautiful last leg of the trip, from southern Florida across the water to the islands. But before you can fly that leg, most of us need to get down to Florida to begin with. Coming from Toronto, that means either getting over or around the Appalachian Mountains. And for a VFR pilot flying in a small plane that's limited to 14,000 feet, that generally means going around the mountains, since getting over them in visual conditions can be hard to count on, with clouds often blanketing big parts of the range. Over the 2 months of planning, I must have laid out 30 different routes, but generally you either cross the mountains in the northern part of the range, where the peaks are only 2,000 to 3,000 feet, and then fly down along the coast, or you fly down the west side of the Appalachians and then cross over when you get close to Atlanta, and then go down to Florida from there. Ultimately, though, that decision can't be made until a day or two before the trip, when the weather forecasts start to firm up. On the way down, we planned to take the eastern route, clearing customs in the US at Buffalo, then flying down from there over central Pennsylvania into Virginia and stopping at Charlotte for the night. The next morning, we would go down to Savannah and then fly from there down to Florida along the coast before making the crossing over to the Bahamas. I settled on this route after a lot of research and discussions with other pilots who had made the flight and generously offered to share their insights and experiences. And Fort Pierce came up time and again as a great place to stop in Florida. The FBO there apparently has tons of experience helping people make the flight over to the Bahamas and offers guidance, tips, emergency equipment rentals, and just generally a great experience. I gotta say, I was not thrilled with the experience at Fort Pierce. It's a fine little FBO, but when I got there was nobody, and I mean nobody, available to answer any questions or give any guidance or tips for flying over to the Bahamas. They didn't even have any off-the-shelf information or pamphlets about making the trip over. Thankfully, I'd done all the research already, so I was feeling pretty prepared. It would have been nice to talk to somebody about any sort of recent changes that they'd seen on a trip over, but it wasn't really necessary. After a night in Fort Pierce, the plan was to head out for the Bahamas on the Saturday morning. This meant flying down the coast to about Fort Lauderdale and then striking out over the water from there. I planned to fly over to Freeport, over Abaco, and then down to Eleuthera. After a week on Eleuthera, we would take a scenic flight over Cat Island, then over Long Island to check out Dean's Blue Hole, and then up to Exuma. After a week on Exuma, we'd fly north over the Exuma Keys, then back over Nassau and Bimini before heading back to Florida, and then we'd follow the coastal route up the east coast of the US back towards Toronto. The most nerve-wracking part about the flight to the Bahamas is definitely the open water crossing. The idea of losing your engine in the middle of the big blue ocean is a bit terrifying, and I spent a ton of time preparing for that. If we were going to have to ditch in the ocean, I wanted us to be over-prepared, starting with a life raft and a ditch bag to help us survive a few days on the water. Technically, a life raft isn't required when flying to the Bahamas. Each country has its own requirements, but whether you look at Canadian, American, or Bahamian regulations, a life raft is not considered necessary. But I didn't want to meet the bare minimum requirements. I wanted us to be really ready. There are plenty of outfits in Florida that will rent you a life raft and survival gear, but I decided that for us it made more sense to just buy a raft. And after a ton of research and finding out that my number one choice would unfortunately not be available till midsummer because of supply chain issues, I ended up going with my number two choice. It's the Rescue Case 6-person emergency life raft. It's actually designed more for boating than aviation. It's supposed to be 25 pounds. It's more like 29. I'm in the water. The life raft sits right behind the pilot's seat. Basically, in the event of a ditching, I step out onto the wing, pull it out, throw it out, pull the cord, and we're good to go. The ditch bag is from ACR. It's their ACR Express ditch bag. It's got about 25 pounds of buoyancy, and it can hold enough for about 2-3 days worth of stuff. Fully loaded, weighs about half what the life raft weighs, so it sits behind the co-pilot's seat. In the event of an emergency, Bruno pulls it out, throws it in the water, jumps in after it, and we get in the life raft. I'll open it up, I'll show you what's inside it. Keep in mind, everybody's going to have slightly different needs for their survival, so this is just what I chose to put inside. Let's take a look. Alright, let's take a look at what's in the ditch bag. So it's kind of divided into a couple of different categories. First are things to help us be seen and to see. And then the second is things to help us kind of survive for a couple of days while we're out on the water. Hopefully for not even a couple of days, but up to 2 or 3 days if necessary. So the first and most important thing is this. This is the personal locator beacon. It's a 406 megahertz PLB from ACR. I think it's the Rescue Link. So what it does is it sends out a satellite signal that helps any search and rescue people pinpoint us much more accurately even than the emergency locator transmitter that's on the plane. Second is a radio. It's a VHF radio. It's the PJ2 from Sporties. I actually keep this in the plane with me at all times just in case I have a radio failure. And it actually came in handy on this trip, and you'll see why a little bit later. But this will allow us to actually talk to any search and rescue people that are wandering around above us in the air or on a boat. This is a can of smoke, liquid smoke. So, not liquid smoke, smoke. It basically, you open the can up and it releases, I think it's a red smoke that rises up to 100 or 200 feet. And so it'll help any airplanes or boats that are in the area see you physically if they can't. This is actually a flag that's got the internationally standard semaphore for SOS on it. And what you do is you spread it out either on the raft or on the water next to you so people flying overhead can see you. And then these are a couple of handheld flares. So this is if there's a boat somewhere nearby, either in the day or at night, you can just light it up and it should get their attention a little bit more easily than you waving your hands and screaming. And then in order to be seen, or to help us see, we've got just these light sticks that just gives us a little bit of a light glow at night. It's not really going to help us do a lot of work, but it makes us feel like it's not pitch black. In order to actually do any work, I've got a couple of these headlamps to help us do whatever we need to do. So that's it for actually being seen and seeing. When I talked to a lot of people, what they said was really the PLB is all you need. Once if you got the PLB and search and rescue is out there, within a day, if not less, they will find you. But I like to be over-prepared just in case. So to that end, these are the things we need to help us actually survive the couple of days. The most important things are water. We've got 2 liters here, so for 2 of us, we've each got a liter. It's not really enough for what we would do on a day-to-day basis, but it'll at least help us get through a couple of days. And then to stay warm, we've got, these are actually just emergency bivvies, little sleeping bags, and a tent. So the raft that we got doesn't have a cover on it, so these things will help keep the sun off of us. They are meant to keep you warm, but you turn them inside out and they should reflect the sunlight away and help keep you cool and keep you out of the sun. If you can't stay out of the sun, for the parts that can't stay out, a little bit of sunscreen, handheld GPS, just so we know where we are. If we have to talk to search and rescue, we can give them coordinates, spare glasses, and food, emergency rations. So these are good for one person for, I believe it's 3 days. And these will last, if you don't unpack it, they'll last for 5 years. So these are a good thing to have in your ditch bag and just kind of keep it there. And then of course the ditch bag itself. Most important thing that goes in the bag though, bottle of scotch. It'll help me get through the 2 days while staying sane, and, you know, if I have to, if I see a shark, I can bop it on the nose with this. It's better than my fist. And if that doesn't work, well, the shark can enjoy a scotch while it's eating me. Kidding. Don't take a bottle of scotch with you, and definitely do not hit a shark on the nose with a bottle of scotch. But that's it. That's the ditch bag. As I said, yours might be different. This is what I felt was right for us. So with the life raft and the ditch bag secured, I felt pretty comfortable that we were ready for the worst should it happen. And it was time to turn our attention to packing for the actual trip itself. We initially were planning to take our bikes down with us so we could ride around the islands, but it pretty quickly became apparent that we just weren't going to have the weight capacity. Between our luggage, our snorkeling gear, our camera gear, the food for a couple of weeks, the odds and ends around the plane, we were at max gross weight for the plane already with a full load of fuel. All told, with all that stuff in, we had about 200 pounds of gear packed in the back of the plane. So that's it. The gear was packed and stowed into the plane, and we were ready to head south for our big adventure. In the next video, I'll share the first couple of legs as we cross the border into the US and fly down to Charlotte and then on to Fort Pierce, Florida. And then from there, future videos will show the crossing that we made over to the Bahamas, the couple of weeks that we spent on the islands there, and the flight home from the Bahamas, where we ran into a bit of a snag that I was not expecting. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of the future videos in this series or the other videos that I make. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and as always, fly safe.